were a couple other things that we wanted to talk about today as well. Uh, and some of these segments are kind of tied in together, but I do want to keep them kind of separate because there's uh, nuance and differences in both. But just recently, uh, somebody had sent something along to me. My friend Angela had sent something along to me about Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and it was a congressional hearing with the FBI about how they label white supremacy in America. So, we did a segment earlier about how to handle white supremacy socially, and in business and things like that. And this is a little bit more official as far as what the FBI should be doing when it comes to domestic terrorism as it pertains to white supremacist terrorism. So let's take a look at this video and see what she has to say and how the official from the FBI responds. And then I want to go over an article with you guys too that kind of touches on the same subject. So let's take a look.
White men invoking white supremacy and engaging in mass shootings are almost immune from being labeled domestic terrorists in their violence. Mr. Ricci, the San Bernardino attack was labeled, the San Bernardino attack of December 2nd, 2015, was labeled as a domestic terrorist incident. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Mr. Austin, do you know the June 12th, 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting was also labeled as a domestic terrorist incident, correct?
That's my understanding.
Mr. Salim, when Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old white supremacist, entered the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church and murdered 9 African-American worshipers, was that labeled as an incident of domestic terrorism?
I don't believe it was, but there's no question that it was.
Okay.
So it was, in your belief.
If there's no question that it was domestic terrorism, why did his organization, why did his governmental body not label it as such when they've labeled many other incidents that were not associated with white supremacy as domestic terrorism? There's not really a good answer for that, it seems like.
As a leader in this space, it was an incidence of domestic terrorism, but it was not labeled as such.
That's correct.
Was the white supremacist shooting at Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue labeled as a domestic terrorist incident?
I'm not aware that it was, although then Attorney General Sessions came out and called it that. But the charges that have been brought to bear and are currently playing out in court are not ones of terrorism.
So despite all of that rhetoric that we...
That's funny. So, they'll use it for political means and, make it sound like they're being tough on this sort of thing, but then they don't put it through official channels as such. It says a lot there.
We were hearing they weren't actually labeled, these white supremacist incidents were not labeled as domestic terrorist incidents. And, I really dug into some of these distinctions. What was labeled as domestic terrorism? What was labeled as a hate crime? And I could not help but, as much as I tried to dig in and explain, I could not help but feel and see that attacks committed by Muslim Americans were almost automatically labeled as domestic terrorist incidents, yet white supremacist shooting after shooting after shooting is not. And I can't help but come to the conclusion that these labels, what's being labeled as...
That's because only brown people can be terrorists, right? So ridiculous. But that seems to be what they're getting at here. Or if they're labeling anybody who may be Muslim as a terrorist, when they do something, when they kill people in a mass shooting or something like that. But the second it happens with a white supremacist, it's just That's not domestic terrorism at all. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Terrorism is almost exclusively coming down to the identity, and it seems as though white men invoking white supremacy and engaging in mass shootings are almost immune from being labeled domestic terrorists in their violence. Do you find similar patterns, Mr. Salim?
I think when we look at, and I'll just call it what it is, the terrorism that has been perpetrated against not just Jewish communities, but against Muslim communities, against Christian communities in Charleston, against Sikh communities in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and a range of other communities that organize based on race, national origin, ethnicity, color, etc. Like these acts that take lives, I don't know how you can label these actions in the eyes of the victims or the families or the communities that are affected anything other than acts of terrorism.
Thank you very much. And
Okay, so then why he doesn't give any explanation for why they don't do that though? Why don't they label these things as domestic terrorism? I mean, that's his personal opinion, and that good for him, you know. But what the hell is that going to do for the legal issues, you know, or for precedent and things like that? There's no reason that these things shouldn't be labeled as domestic terrorism, because that's exactly what they are, is domestic terrorism. So, you know, like, and to be honest, if you look at it, domestic terrorism, or actually white supremacy, right-wing violence, is the types of crime as far as domestic terrorism that are the most prevalent as of right now. Assessing the right-wing terrorism threat in the United States, it says let's see here. The last year saw advances and setbacks in the fight against American white supremacist, anti-government, and other violent right-wing groups. The good news is that the number of deaths from terrorism and other extreme forms of violence was low, but the bad news for 2022 is that violent rhetoric and threats are becoming normalized in everyday politics. Yeah, you see this a lot with politicians simulating violence against their political opponents and things like that, or saying that maybe we should go to war, civil war, things like that. And it's just kind of ridiculous, you know, like they say that they don't have any bearing on their constituents and their ability to enact violence, like the January 6th insurrection, but their words do invoke such violence, and there's no denying that. In a shift that will have positive long-term consequences, the Biden administration has made right-wing terrorism a priority. In June, the administration released a strategy for countering domestic terrorism, attempting to lay out both the different facets of the threat and how various security agencies should respond. The federal government has also launched an ambitious set of investigations focusing on the January 6th insurrectionists and bringing hundreds of them to trial. You know, one of the things that I thought was funny is the irony that people say that the January 6th riots, January 6th insurrection wasn't an attempted coup, but you see people storming the Capitol with fucking rebel flags, with the you know, flag of the South. And you know, we beat them once already. Like, do we have to do it again? Come on, guys. Come on. So also I wanted to show you this one here. Why it is so hard for America to designate domestic terrorism and hate crimes. On March 16th, 2021, Robert Aaron Long opened fire on businesses in the Atlanta area that employ a large number of Asians. 6 of his 8 murder victims were Asian women. Similar, Dylan Roof, who murdered 9 black parishioners inside an African Methodist Episcopal church in South Carolina, and Patrick Wood Cruces, who murdered 23 people in Texas in the deadliest anti-Latino attack in recent history, prosecutors should consider hate crime charges for Long. Yet, Some people are actually buying that Long's actions were solely over an alleged sex addiction. There are a ton of massage places in the Atlanta area. Why did he only target ones operated by Asians? Is it because he is racist and probably sexist, plain and simple? It should not take domestic terrorists writing white supremacist manifestos like those of Roof and Crucius in order for us to classify their behavior as hate crimes. It is not enough for people to only be convicted of murder. They should also be convicted of hate crimes, or we will continue to see this every day. Mundane acts of racism spill over into larger acts of domestic terrorism. So that's a good point there. I mean, it lets people, I guess, skirt the severity of these issues, right? It allows for things to be downplayed. The word terrorism is a very powerful word, especially in America, and should not be reserved just for Muslims in other countries who bomb each other and things like that. You know, terrorism comes in all forms, and unfortunately here in America, it seems the biggest perpetrators of such terrorism are white supremacists these days. So it's definitely something that we need to look into more. I'm glad that, give credit where credit's due. I'm glad the Biden administration is actually trying to do something a little bit about it. And we'll see if anything comes of it. But as of right now, it's really looking like there's going to be a continuance of these types of things happening. That there's going to be lots of people who are out there committing these acts and not being labeled domestic terrorists just simply because of their skin color and the people that they decided to murder. And that's something that needs to change in this country for sure. Definitely.